The 22nd of May 1944. North of the Admiralties, night, chop hard white caps, no moon. Hashimoto stands in the control room with one gloved hand on the cold rim of a valve wheel, listening past the steady tick of the trim pump and the low, even hum of the gyros. Condensation beads along the bulkhead and runs in thin silver threads. Battery vapor bites the back of the throat. Breath in 3 counts, hold on 4, release without sound. Depth needle steady. Screw noise distant. The sea should be blind. A faint hammering comes through the hull, not a propeller, not surf, but a pattern, short, mechanical, impatient. The escort has ears. The bearing that was a suggestion becomes a line. Silence orders pass in whispers. Men freeze. The helmsman's knuckles pale against sweating steel. Hashimoto closes his eyes to widen his hearing. The boat is a lung. Every amp drawn is a second of life. The tick of the pump is metronome calm. The shape above changes speed. Water blossoms thud the surface. One then, a fan, each splash a white crown he can only imagine. The sound climbs down the water column with a skittering urgency, and then the sea answers with a cluster of hard, dry cracks, and after that a single, heavy blow that presses the ribs of the hull and knocks breaths out of chests. Hedgehog. Contact fusing. No lottery of depth, no mercy of layers. Do not surface. Inside their air radar ring. Preserve the boat for a target that matters. The private oath repeats against the palate like a prayer with teeth. He slows his breathing and counts the seconds between the escort's passes, waits for the long hush that means the hunter is listening, not running. A voice rides the black water steel to steel through the sea, cut short and disciplined, alien in its clipped confidence. Range decreasing. Mark, stand by Hedgehog. Launch. Another fan of splashes. The boat shivers. A wrench slants off a rack and rings like a bell stuffed with cloth. The trim pump keeps time. The gyros are steady. Perfection holds its posture in the dark, but above something faster than skill is closing the distance, and the night, once a friend, shrinks to the size of the next pattern. They used to laugh about American workboats. In wardrooms and lecture halls before the Empire was at war, men spoke with the comfortable superiority of craftsmen. America, they said, would bolt engines to bathtubs, plank on a few guns, teach farm boys a single trick, and call the result a fleet. Elegance would decide matters at sea, just as it did in a tea ceremony. Perfect shape, perfect balance, perfect hand. The laugh sounded tidy then and harmless. It does not sound that way in a control room that hums like a battery cage, while a stranger's arithmetic ticks closer through water. The expectation was simple. A submarine finely handled could unwrite the enemy's geometry. Every choice ballast trim helmsman's touch, the captain's patience, was a sentence in a clean grammar. The ocean offered rooms to hide the skin of night on the surface, the cold slabs of a thermocline, the broken outline of a layer. Noise could be shaved off a boat the way a plane shaves wood. One valve less, one pump quieter, one habit made invisible. Perfection promised a protective halo. A perfect boat, with a perfect crew, would always have one more degree of freedom than the hunting ships above. Then the hunting ships arrived in gangs, and they were not elegant. Their decks were blunt, their silhouettes unlovely, their paint coarse. But they came off lines that moved like belts, and each one wore the same simple heart. Modular switchboards, swap-in radar heads, a sound room built to a pattern so tight that any man rated for the chair could sit down in a sister ship and find the gain knob without glancing. The shipyards did not chase the last whisper of precision. They chased the hour hand. A measurement of time sat behind everything, how many days from keel to shakedown, how many hours from failure to replacement, how many minutes from first ping to weapon in the water. In the submarine school, the doctrine for surviving depth charge spread was an act of geometry and nerve. You treated the enemy's ignorance as armor. He could not know your true depth. He must cast a net. You gave him the wrong net by leaving a false trail, by bending a thermal layer, by shaping a knuckle. You bet your life that the interval between pattern and pattern would outlast your next turn, your next trim. Then a new sound entered the sea, a drumroll of little launches light and quick, followed by a silence that tasted like electricity. The explosions did not march on a depth scale. They erupted only when steel met steel. A doctrine designed to defeat a depth lottery, discovered that the lottery had been abolished. From the surface, the new escort did not look like a revolution. It looked like a compromise. It traded speed for numbers, grace for reach. It chose engines that could be maintained by men who had never seen an ocean before they put on a uniform. It carried a forward-firing rack that looked like a hedgehog's back, inelegant and almost comical, until those spines turned the water around you into a map of your mistakes. The weapon did not waste itself trying to guess your depth. It waited. It listened with the ship. It shook your ribs only if it had already found you. In that simple condition, no bang unless contact, lay the blade that cut all the careful layers to ribbons. Once you understand that the rest follows with the cold logic of a tide table. If contact produces fire, then contact must be denied. But contact grew fatter, louder, faster. Radios had once been a flashlight in fog. Now they were a web, bearings from the sky, bearings from a shore station you could not shell, bearings from a wing of torpedo bombers that never had to see you to know where to drop sonobuoys, bearings sewn together by people you could not hear, whose names you would never learn. All that information fell into the hands of ships that did not need to be rare. And because they were not rare, a single failure aboard one hull did not matter. Another hull was a few miles away, and another beyond it. Each could trade fatigue and fuel, and keep the circle tight. The betrayal sits in the body before it sits in the mind. You feel it when the watch bill shortens because the listening seems non-stop. You feel it when the helmsman's shoulders won't drop, even after the screws above fade. You feel it when your own lungs start to match the pulse of the pump, because breath has become a ration like battery minutes, and the enemy's weapon writes seconds into the water. Everything that once measured pride begins to measure exposure. The more perfect your quiet, the more you understand that quiet no longer owns the night. America did not try to teach every man every delicate trick. America taught the ship to be legible. Dials were placed so that any trained hand could take over without a whisper. Consoles could be replaced in hours rather than nursed for days. A damaged stack did not call for a psalm of repair. It called for a crane and a spare. The moral choice lay there hidden under the wiring, a preference for replacement over reverence. The ship was a machine to be kept in the fight, not a shrine to be preserved. It is not that the men lacked pride. It is that their pride flowed toward availability. They did not adore the tool. They adored what the tool allowed them to do, again and again, without pause. The submarine service had always trusted the saboteur's virtues, patience, finesse, the art of being the only mind in the room that understood what was happening. To face an enemy who refused to meet you on that ground, who instead flooded the room with dozens of bright, blunt instruments, felt like disrespect. That feeling curdled. It turned to anger each time a pattern of charges punished empty water to contempt, when you glimpsed an escort's crude welds through the periscope lens, until the day the crude welds held firm, while the new forward rack wrote your outline, into the sea with 24 small murderous pencils. Then, contempt had nowhere to stand. There is a moment when a captain, even a proud one, starts counting in a different currency. Not yards, not degrees, seconds. The launch rhythm sets it a stubby series at the bow. A heartbeat's pause while the ship itself listens, then the verdict. If there is no impact, the ship adjusts. Bearings cross from the air. The screen rotates. Another hull takes the next run. The pursuit no longer feels like a duel. It feels like a shift rotation. Your evasion does not beat a man. It beats a schedule until it does not. The old faith makes a last stand in memory. In memory there was a boat that slid under a convoy like a small god, chose a belly fired, and fled down a cool stone stair of water, while the enemy wasted barrels and curses above. In memory the sea could be persuaded. But the present tense has a different grammar. The enemy sets watchers in layers you cannot touch. He lends patience to machines. He breaks the hunt into subtasks and pushes them through a pipeline. When a piece breaks, he does not weep over it. He replaces the piece. You begin to understand that your perfection is not being measured. Your time is. Even the sounds have been demoted. The sea used to be a theatre of fine distinctions. A human ear could hear the difference between a deep prop and a light one, between a tired bearing and a new one, between freighter and warship. Those differences still exist, yet they no longer decide outcomes. What decides outcomes is the speed with which a ship that has never met you can go from a faint line on a scope to a hard return to a forward throw that waits for the touch of your hull before it cares to explode. The instrument's modest intelligence humiliates the artist. It is not a better poet. It is a better clerk, and the clerk has been given the keys. The contempt that once seemed like armor now feels like a knife turned inwards. The word crude hurts because it keeps not being true where it matters. Crude does not learn this quickly. Crude does not share a single set of diagrams across 100 hulls. Crude does not swap a broken brain in the morning and sail at noon. Crude does not lock its whole doctrine to a simple cause and effect, contact or no contact, and let men trust the clarity. You were told that the enemy's ships would shatter under pressure because they were many and cheap. Instead, they multiplied under pressure because they were many and cheap. A pattern hits the surface, again a thrum of little throws like knuckles rapping a door. The men brace without order. Somewhere a petty officer counts without meaning to. The number wants to be a prayer, but it is only a clock. This is what betrayal feels like, not that the enemy broke the rules, but that he is playing a different game, whose rules use your best habits against you. Not that perfection failed, but that perfection was never invited. The elegant sentence is still beautiful on the page. Out here the book has been replaced with a ledger. When the water stills, the pumps resume their patient metronome. Condensation runs again. The gyros whisper. It would be easy to pretend the world has returned to its rightful mode, yet the room knows. The next search will begin with a cue from a radio you cannot touch, pass to a pilot you cannot see, land in a ship you have not counted, and end with a contact-only blast that cares nothing for your poetry. The oath that kept the boat and crew safe now reads like superstition, and the man who made it, trying to square pride with survival, begins the slow, painful arithmetic that turns a doctrine into an elegy. The order to go silent travels by hand, not voice. One tap to the helmsman's sleeve, 2 fingers to the plainsman, the barest nod toward the engineer. The trim pump is stopped on a breath. The boat exhales a thread of ballast and settles as if willing itself thinner. Men shift weight an inch to ease the long, slow bow down. The captain watches the needle ease toward the planned depth and clamps his jaw so that teeth will not click when the hull flexes. The gyros keep their whisper. Everything else becomes the patient throb of blood behind the ears. He counts, then stops counting. Numbers feel loud. A precise 3-degree turn, to lay a knuckle the wake scrawled into the layer with care, as if drawing false handwriting on water. The sea accepts the lie. The temperature gradient shows on the repeater in a firm step. The cool slab begins to mask the boat. The knuckle drifts off like a decoy shadow, a phantom for bearing men above who want to believe they still have you. The escort passes, screws, slackening to listen, and there is a moment, one long, thin moment, when the world is nothing but the needle, the faint oil smell, the cold wheel under a glove, and the thought that elegance still matters. The moment dies with the return of a line on an enemy screen neither he nor any man aboard can see. A second ship takes over, bow angled the rhythm of her screws, different, more impatient, younger metal. The first hunter was tricked. The second was waiting to be told. Bearings do not wander as they should when a boat vanishes into a layer. They tighten. They trade from hull to hull like a relay baton. The men who could once make a destroyer doubt now find themselves teaching it to believe. The helmsman's hands are steady until they are not. It is a tiny rebellion, a tremor that begins in the little finger and climbs to the rest. He squeezes harder, and the tremor hides, then returns bolder, as if the sea itself is vibrating. The captain pretends not to see and watches everything else. He feels the weight of the batteries as a taste on the tongue. Every amp is 1 second, then half a second. He measures the time it takes for a man to swallow. He wants to order a trim drill to keep minds busy, then knows that movement is risk, and still, after another pattern walks the surface, he gives the signal, because stillness is becoming its own noise. The drill is simple, a small exchange of flood and blow to correct a creeping stern heaviness a minute touch, the sort of thing they have done since training until the motions are as forgettable as breathing. The petty officer cracks the valve, and in that tiny gasp of metal the boat lists a hair more than it should. It is nothing. It is everything. The plainsman compensates a shade too late. The bow dips past the line. The needle twitches. The captain's throat tightens without permission. He raises a finger. The petty officer corrects. The boat steadies, but the failure hangs in the air like a word no one will admit to hearing. Above, there is a new voice in the sea. It comes from farther off and higher, a skate of air screws, a wing tracing a lazy oval. The captain imagines the man in the aircraft seat, looking into a glass tube full of quiet. The hush of Sonobuoy's crosstalk fed down to the ships. Bearings plucked out of the sky like fruit. The circle widens. The screen becomes a ring that shifts with a patient bureaucratic will. No single hunter must be perfect, because the hunt is an office now. If one clerk grows tired, another takes the ledger and keeps the line moving. The boat loses 10 meters and then steals back 8. The men return to that careful, stretched, breathing quiet that tastes like iron and varnish. Someone booms a silent prayer downward, not with words but with knuckles pressed white against a knee. The captain's tongue taps the roof of his mouth to keep time with nothing. The line of sweat under his cap feels cold as it runs down onto his neck. He imagines the destroyer's bow lifted just enough for the sonar dome to find its sweet angle. He imagines the operator above a kid, maybe trained to one chair with one job, as easily swapped as a fuse. A new pattern hurls itself at the black. The small splashes crown the surface with a fast arithmetic the captain can sense but not see, and then the water returns to quiet, withholding the answer. The boat waits for nails to rake the hull and none come. The weapon either missed or is still listening. He will never know which. The helmsman's tremor becomes a shake, and the man clamps his wrist against the wheel. The captain almost speaks a gentling word, and does not because words are for rooms with air. He slices a thin turn into the layer and feels the boat slide as a hand might slide under silk. The metal hum changes by a note too small for anyone but men like these to hear. It is a perfect evasion. It should be enough. The ocean should reward competence with blind mercy. Instead, another set of screws bears in from the quadrant. They have abandoned fresh, deliberate, the geometry reset by people who never had to see the boat to know where it went. The screen is not a pack, it is a network. It does not lose interest. It rekeys. The engineer touches the battery gauge with the back of his knuckle, as if to comfort it or seek absolution from it. The smell of acid grows brighter, a sharp phantom of burning apple peel. Condensation gathers on the overhead and drips in a slow, maddening rhythm. Men start to hear it as a code. The captain listens through the metal and catches a low, ugly grind as one chain in a launcher hauls another set of spines into ready. Not a depth charge. The forward thrower. The quiet between throws is not peace. It is a stethoscope laid against the hull. Breath becomes a currency. He thinks of it that way because the math feels truthful where pride has begun to lie. If a pattern can be launched every so many seconds, and the ring can keep a contact warm for so many minutes, then the boat must buy silence with oxygen and pay with nerve. He has nerve. His men have nerve. The ring has time. Time is heavier than nerve in this sea. A soft clank inside the boat lands like a shot. A spanner has walked off its shelf, found the deck rolled into a stop. The nearest sailor crushes it under his boot and closes his eyes as if he could rewind the sound. No answer from above. Not this time. Fear spools back, tucks itself under discipline with the shame of a dog warned from a table. The captain files the moment in the locker where these things go. There's no room left in that locker. He jams another memory into it anyway. Another evasion. He uses bathymetry burned into his head from charts, read under a single night bulb, an underwater shelf, here, a slump there, a place where currents fret against a lip. He lets the boat sag, and then raises her a hand's breadth, painting a thin smear of bubbles where he chooses. He feels the plainsman's relief at a successful trace. The petty officer at trim risks a ghost of a grin that says the universe, though unkind, still recognizes craft. The grin dies as a far-off aircraft turns and lays a new line of listening behind them like breadcrumbs. The ring shifts again. The discipline that dignified a man now looks like a ritual performed before a blank wall. Every adjustment is perfect. The feedback from the sea is perfect too, but it returns in a language whose verbs have changed. The verb is not evade, the verb is delay, the verb is endure, the verb is wait for the shift change, and pray the next hull in the rotation is just distant enough that a gap opens wide enough to slip a hull through. He is not fighting a destroyer captain. He is boxing a clock, a stop to listen. The boat lies dead still, even its small creaks hushed by men's muscles locked in fixed poses. In that stillness, breaths become hammer blows in the skull. He counts the time between bearing ticks plots in his head. The pace of the outer ring feels the pressure on his eardrums settle as if the sea itself were waiting. Then it comes the first faint tick of the escort's ping on the edge. A sweep through lost another tick louder, then the steady rhythm of a man who has found a vein and intends to keep tapping it until the workday ends. He could order a bold move, a sudden dive through the layer to cold black, a sprint a break with the oath. He tastes the order on his tongue and holds it. The oath was not superstition when he made it, and it is not superstition now. It is a rope across a ravine. Yet the rope frays each time the ring closes, with no face attached to it, only a process. Pride says, hold. Experience says, hold. The pounding behind his eyes says there will come a minute when holding is just another way to drown. The next pattern is tight. The little throws slap the water like a row of hands striking a drum in perfect time. Men bend without being told, as if the boat itself were cringing. The impacts come not as explosions but as verdicts, each one deciding not to exist unless it earns the right. No detonation, no detonation, no detonation. The fourth is a small crack that noses the ribs. Not a hit, something brushed or grazed a warning. The helmsman inhales so sharply, the sound seems loud as a shout. The captain fixes his gaze on the depth needle, so he will not look at the man's eyes. Silence again, then a curt voice in the water too clipped to be human, and therefore unmistakably human range decreasing mark stand by. The same words from a different mouth on a different ship. The ritual moves around them like liturgy, indifferent to which choir sings it. He imagines the slate aboard the escort contact, time bearings speed projected, coarse tactical notes, legible to any relief operator, written in a hand taught identically in 100 schools. His own notes are a private code of experience and instinct. Their notes are a public language designed to survive its writers. The engineer signals a fractional drop in battery health with 2 fingers. Not enough to panic, enough to clock. The captain tastes acid again and realizes his jaw has tightened until his teeth ache. He forces it loose and makes the small slow motion for another turn under the layer, then changes his mind midway and does nothing, because the ring is learning his rhythm. Doing nothing feels like cowardice. It is not. It is the last art left to a hunted thing. The men hold their poses. The boat holds her breath. The ring works. The aircraft hums. The clerk at the shore plot scratches a pencil line. The destroyer's bow leans into the next pass. The petty officer at trim who failed his drill by a hair and has not forgiven himself begins to shake so visibly the man beside him lays a steadying palm on his sleeve. There is no rebuke. There is no comfort. There is only time moving like a conveyor. The discipline that once promised control has become the posture of an offering. In the calculus, now enforced sacrifice buys nothing except another few minutes to perform the dance again with better form and worse odds. When the bow wave above slackens, when the sea falls back into its old familiar black, the captain does a wicked tiny thing. He imagines the escort's operator rubbing at tired eyes, lifting the headphones, letting blood flow back into pinched cartilage. He imagines that brief private weakness and knows it means nothing. Another operator will sit, another ship will lean, another fan will slap the surface and write a verdict. His skill has not lessened. It has been surrounded, translated, and made irrelevant by a machine that treats excellence as background noise. He sets his mouth and keeps the boat exactly where she is, as if by refusing to move he could force the sea to remember who once mastered whom. The sound returns like a memory with a grudge. Little wooden thuds kicked off a steel deck, quick and businesslike. Then the hungry pause while the water listens. The pause is worse than the noise. It stretches, it measures, it decides, and in that decision the boat feels skinned. A cough from the batteries rides the air, sulphur-bitten sweet, a warning that is both chemical and moral. He can smell the men now, wool, oil, salt, damp, because the ventilation has been throttled to the thinnest thread. The helmsman's sleeve twitches as if a current runs through his arm. The depth needle holds and still seems to creep. One more pattern. The spines slap down in a fast crown. The men lean without orders. The hull answers with a faint, involuntary groan, bone talking to bone. No detonation. The crew's lungs release in a soft collective tremor that is not relief, only the lack of a verdict. In that shiver, Hashimoto hears the last of the old pride let go. It does not die with a shout. It dies with a shrug, disguised as discipline. He has kept the oath as if it were carved into the steel. Stay down inside the ring. Do not surface under the eyes that never sleep. Keep the boat alive for a target that earns the risk. The oath has governed every line of every patrol. Now the air tastes like pennies, and the lights lose a tone, and the engineer lifts 2 fingers not as a plea but as arithmetic. Battery minutes are lives. Each man is spending his in silence. The ring above does not tire. A thin, cruel clarity settles in his chest. Their kill cycle is paced to human comfort. His stealth cycle is paced to chemistry. Stand by, he mouths no voice, and the words are only for himself. He hates what he is about to do because it is honest. He watches the second hand he carries in his head sweep a quarter of a circle and feels his own pulse race to meet it. 110, 115, 120, too fast for careful thought, perfect for a decision that hurts. The order is a series of touches and signs shaped by years, in which shouting meant death, blow, ready, brace. No one repeats it. No one needs to. The engineer's hands are steady as he gives the boat air. The bow lifts with a slow rising hunger. The hull breathes as if it has lungs after all. The pumps that have been held in a monk's silence kick like mules for an instant and then fall obedient again. The boat angles toward a sin. The surface breaks over them with a cold slap that sounds like guilt. The conning tower punches into air that tastes wrong after the long press of water. Hatches crack and gulp. The thin ribbon of exhaust that had been fouling every breath goes up at last. Hashimoto stands up into the night and meets a sky that is not a sky, only a lid for the enemy's devices. The wind is clean and cruel. White flecks race across black water. No moon. The surfacing roll settles under his boots like a swallowed insult. His throat opens for the first full breath in too long, and the rush only reminds him what it cost. Engines. He does not have to speak the word. It leaps from the crew like an old reflex. The boat claws forward in a sprint that feels glorious for one stupid second, and then exactly horribly wrong because forward is louder than alive. He thinks of the air search radar nets with their lazy sweeps that are not lazy at all, of the aircraft dozing in orbits that never end, of the destroyer escorts whose bow waves glitter with confidence. He has traded one certainty for another. Below the men ride the surge in their knees and count without meaning to, because sprinting is also a clock. The sea throws a glint off nothing, and his eyes snatch it and make it into a mast that is not there. Fear paints what pride erased. He drags his gaze along the horizon to punish it for lying, and meets a true shape, something small and exact and straight, stabbing white water as it turns. A far light flickers habit not signal a sailor's harmless check. It might be a star. It might be an eye. His mouth tastes bitter copper again. He snaps down and slams the hatch with hands that remember how to make speed look like calm. The order to dive is already halfway through the boat, with no syllables attached to it. Crash. The boat takes the word into her bones and translates it into angles. The planes bite. Tanks swallow water. The nose lurches, then smooths as the men at their posts make art where panic wants to live. His pulse hammers loud enough to shake the needles. He forces it down by gripping a wheel until the glove creaks. The stink of exhaust ghosts the space, and then thins. The sea steals it back. Depth returns like confession. 10, 20, 30. He watches the gauge, as if it were measuring shame. A new fan rattles the skin of the ocean, and the listening pause opens like a mouth that knows it will eat. The first 3 cracks come as dry little snaps from far off. The 4th is closer. The 5th is a slap to the ribs that makes one man grunt even though he trained that reflex away years ago. The weapon needed them to exist before it consented to. It is a priest that only speaks when the penitent shows his face. He showed his face. He knows it. The boat knows it. Hold her there. It comes out as a whisper that would be lost in peacetime. Here it is law. The plainsman's knuckles are white, then pink, then white again. The helmsman's tremor returns in a flood, a little river that runs elbow to wrist and back. Hashimoto does not look at him, because he cannot afford to empty pity into that place. He is full of something else, not fear, not yet, but the small, exact humiliation of a craftsman who has been forced to use a hammer where a scalpel lived. He chose to surface inside the ring he swore to respect. He did it to save lives that would have been spent without meaning. He did it because the chemistry had become a rope around the boat's throat. The decision was clean. The feeling is not. The boat squeezes deeper, finds the familiar dark slab of the layer, glides into it with a care that would have won praise a year ago. Above the ring does the thing it does, a handoff, a replot, a new bearing whispered into a headphone worn by a boy who is not tired, because boys are replaced before they get tired. The new pass comes on schedule. He understands now that schedule is the enemy's true rank. His chest hurts. He realizes his heart is still racing, as if it has been ordered to set an example for the rest of him. He forces a slow inhale, holds releases. The needle settles, the boat steadies. The men become statues with wet eyes. He hears impossibly the small trill of a drop of condensation as it falls and hits a pipe. He imagines 1,000 identical drops hitting 1,000 identical pipes across 1,000 identical hours aboard 100 identical escorts. The thought is absurd and true. It makes something in him sag that will not lift again. He had wanted the enemy to be wrong in one grand way. Instead, they are right in 1,000 small ones that never run out. A kill cycle that begins with a radio he cannot hear, moves through a radar he cannot touch, passes to a chair his torpedoes will never reach, and ends in a rack that will not waste an explosion if it cannot earn it. This is a machine that eats skill without tasting it. He sees for a staggering instant the war from above, as if he had been pulled out of his own skull and set with the aircraft in their circles, with the shore clerks at their maps, with the shipyards slinging engines into open hulls. He sees velocity not as speed but as replacement. He wanted to keep the boat for a target that matters. The sentence sounds thin now. Targets matter in stories. In this math, the only target that matters is the next minute. He can hoard a minute or spend it. He has just spent a pile of them on air and sprint and pride. The ledger will not forget. The next pattern hits the water. The silence afterwards is shorter. One of the little bombs finds the shadow of the hull with the blunt nose of a blind animal that has learned to run along rails. It brushes or almost brushes. No crack follows, only the groaning protest of steel that has been asked to accept a new truth. The men do not flinch this time. They are past flinching. They are inside something colder. He waits for a sign that belongs to him, a sound, a feel of water that he can turn into advantage with touch and patience. Nothing offers itself. The only truths in reach are ugly and enormous. He has broken his oath. He has bent his seamanship to a clock. He will do it again if the minutes demand it, because the minutes are what remain. The shame fills the space where faith lived, and yet it has no heat. It sits heavy and level, like ballast poured into the soul. Steady. The word is, to the plainsman, to the helmsman, to the boat, to the heart. The ring will make another pass. The ring will make 10 more. He will answer each with the best that is left quiet. Small turns a gambler's patience married to a clerk's arithmetic. He understands finally and completely that the enemy's cycle is quicker than his craft, and will stay quicker, because it is fed by a city, not a crew. The realization does not explode. It settles like silt and coats everything. In that coating lies the worst flavor of irrelevance, a knowledge that the thing you are best at has been reclassified as scenery. He opens his eyes and finds the gauge where he left it. The needle is obedient. The boat is obedient. The men are obedient. The world is not. Above, somewhere not far and never near, an operator calls out a bearing in a voice that could belong to any of them because it belongs to none. He feels the blood slow toward something like normal, and knows that normal is the wrong word now. The sea has a new grammar. He will speak it or drown in it. Either way, the sentence that once defined him has been crossed out by a hand that does not care to write beautifully, only quickly. He sets his jaw and prepares to endure the next pass, already aware that endurance itself has been demoted from virtue to delay. The room smells like paper and dusted steel. Afternoon light slants across a table where photographs lie in a grid, corners curling from the heat of hands. No C here, only lines and numbers and the hard shine of fixtures caught by a Navy camera. A petty officer from intelligence stands off to one side with a clipboard and a pencil worn to the nub. He has arranged the prints with a Clark's Pride bow to stern deck, to bilge exterior to schematic. Hashimoto takes the first picture in both hands as if it were delicate. It is not. The deck of a small American escort fills the frame stubby forward utilitarian, with a nest of tubes that look like a toy until you scale them against men in dungarees. The mount's ribs are plain. The charges sit in their sockets like eggs. He sets that print down and moves to the next, a three-quarter view of the same mount turned enough to show how the projector arms are braced. The photographer has captured the bolts in sharp relief. No elegance, only access. A wrench could find every fastener without searching. He slides a finger along the air above the row of projectors, as if he could feel the arc. The petty officer clears his throat to offer a caption, then thinks better of it. A schematic waits under thin tissue paper. He peels the cover back. The cross-section of a bow shows a rounded blister under the waterline, a labelled dome, QHB. The letters are neat and indifferent. He studies the line weight where the dome meets the hull plating and imagines the echo riding that curve. There is a note in English beside it, printed with schoolroom clarity fairing for reduced turbulence. He does not need the translation a junior officer offers. The note is the photograph in another language. The dome is not art, it is a solved problem. He points at the rack in the first picture with one forefinger. Forward throw replaces stern wake attack, he says, and hears the room shuffle as men take this down. Decouples weapon from own ship baffles. He taps the schematic. Domed transducer improves persistence on bearing during approach. He does not look up. He is talking to doctrine, not to people. It is not enough that this exists. It exists everywhere. A young lieutenant asks if the mount can be jammed. Hashimoto does not answer for a heartbeat because the question is late. He places a finger on the contact-fusing diagram in a margin scrap, a simple diagram of a nose that refuses to arm unless it feels metal. No waste, he says. No explosion unless justified. He hears the pencil scratch that phrase down. Someone murmurs about battery endurance, as if invoking a shrine. He keeps his eyes on the prints. He tries for a moment to dislike the thing. The mount is ugly, the safety latch is heavy, the trigger arms blocky. Then the simplicity acquires a kind of cruelty he cannot turn away from. Each piece declares that another ship can have this by Thursday. The photograph shows paint rubbed thin where hands and boots always go. The paint has worn away in the same places on every hull with this pattern. That shared scuff is an emblem. He feels a small, exact weight settle in his chest and knows it is not anger, it is recognition. He lifts the schematic again and traces with a blunt nail the cable run aft to the sound room. The path is straightforward. Break a panel, drop a new one, in reconnect multi-pin plugs with alignment keys you could find with gloved fingers. He imagines a dockside cart with a replacement console and a crewman trained to a check sheet, disconnect, extract, seat test, tone sign off sail. He can hear the stamp hitting the paper. He can hear the ship leaving on schedule. Replacement as a normal act, he says mostly to the dome. Not repair as a ceremony. The petty officer offers a close photograph of the operator's station. The chair is plain, the dial's big, the label's obvious. A laminated card sits on a chain, corners warn the text, rubbed by thumbs. The ladder of procedures is short. A man good at this chair does not need to be special. He needs to be rested and replaced at the right hour. Hashimoto takes time with the image of those dials. He can read the virtue in their typography. Legibility, he says. Designed to be inherited by the next watch. He lays the photograph flat and aligns it with the deck view until the lines of cause and effect are visible even to a civilian imagination, a dome that holds contact, a room that keeps it a rack, that throws on the same bow you used to. Listen a fuse that refuses to flatter guesses, and a carpenter's logic that lets you swap out the heart of the system in an afternoon. The sea, once a negotiator, is reduced here to a medium for signal and action timed by a wall clock. The lieutenant tries again, softer. If the dome is damaged, does the weapon lose its edge? Hashimoto shakes his head once. Not for long. Another dome. Another console. Another operator. The words come out clean because they belong to a ledger, not a memory. He lifts the first print and points to the men around the mount. One has a rag tucked in his belt and an easy posture that says he has done this drill until his body does it without him. The other has grease on his hand and a look that says if a thing breaks, he knows where a new one lives. Their faith is not in a piece, Hashimoto says. It is in the arrival of the next piece. A senior officer at the back of the room clears his throat in a different tone, the tone of an inventory asked to justify itself. Hashimoto turns the print so the room can see the projectors again. Contact-only fusing removed our depth advantage, he says. Forward throw erased the safe arc under the screws. The dome made approach continuous, not episodic. Bearings from air and shore kept the circle tight. He places the photograph down as if setting a weight on a scale. We trained to outlast a man's patience. We were met by a system's patience. The petty officer shifts and accidentally bumps the table. The photographs slide a little and overlap Hedgehog over dome station over rack. The new composite looks like a single machine with human hands as its moving parts. Hashimoto leaves it that way. He does not straighten the prints. The disorder is honest. He asks for the last sheet in the folder. It is a log from a famous run. Dates and hull numbers, positions, notes. He reads the line spacing the way a navigator reads a coast in fog. The span between contacts is short. The column for ammunition is tidy. There are few words in the remarks column because the work did not require poetry to make sense to the next man. He imagines the feeling on those decks, routine sized to killing. He measures without wanting to how many minutes from first ping to launch. The number is small, smaller than it was last year, smaller than his boat's margin for a careful dive. He sets the log down and finally looks up. The faces in the room are alert, expectant, hurt. He has nothing for their feelings, only doctrine. We must speak plainly, he says. What we called superiority was scarcity, dressed as virtue. What they call crude is supply shaped like doctrine. He taps the dome once, with one finger. Availability is a weapon system. No one writes for a beat. The pencil tips hesitate as if the phrase might cut them. He continues anyway because the sentence has chosen him as its voice, and withholding it would be cowardice. When a part fails, they do not negotiate with it. They replace the part and keep the schedule. When a ship is damaged, another steps in, with the same chair, the same dials, the same mount. When an operator tires, another sits, whose hands fall to the same places. He spreads his hands over the grid of prints. The weapon is not the rack. The weapon is the certainty that the rack will always be there, that the dome will keep contact long enough for any ship in the ring to finish the cycle. The clerk at the back puts the phrase to paper at last. The sound of graphite on pulp is louder than it should be. Someone asks carefully if anything we have can answer it. Hashimoto thinks of the oaths men make at sea and the crafts they master to honor those oaths. He thinks of engines nursed back to life, with care that looked like love of watchbills tweaked to find an extra hour of sharpness, of men who learned the sea with such intimacy that they believed intimacy itself was armor. We can injure it, he says. We cannot exhaust it. The room is quiet. The photographs lie with their edges misaligned, a little fleet of pictures that have stopped pretending to be separate. He reaches to square them, then leaves them crooked again. The crookedness feels like the right shape for the truth. He takes one last look at the dome under the waterline and the boxy chair with its fat dials and the hedgehog spines waiting without glamour, and he feels the old instinct to hate them fade to a dull, professional respect. The sea will go on being sea. Men will go on being men. The thing that changes battles is the calendar. When he leaves, he carries nothing in his hands. His palms smell faintly of paper and ink. In the corridor, a fan stutters and then catches again. The beat is steady and workmanlike. He recognizes its virtue, availability, he thinks, and tests the taste of the word as if it were salt. It does not taste noble, it tastes inevitable. He keeps the photographs in his head because they hurt less there. Dome, chair, rack, 3 plain nouns that add up to a verb the sea now obeys. The lesson is not mystical. It is arithmetic how quickly a group can move from first faint contact to the next armed ship back on station, resource over time. Not tons or guns alone, but how many ready ears and ready launchers you can place around a bearing before a hunted hull runs out of minutes. He tests the thought the way a navigator tests a current. A hunter-killer group is a ring of clocks. One clock starts at the ping. Another starts when the first ship's launcher empties and she swaps to listening. A third starts at the tender when a spare console goes into a crate and a truck starts toward a pier. A fourth starts when a relief operator sits hands falling to the same dials. Add them, subtract the dead space, divide by the number of hulls that can take the next pass, and you get the number that matters more than any single captain's nerve detection to relaunch cycle time. In this war, it is counted in hours, often single digits, and every quarter-hour shaved is bloodless victory. Once you speak the number aloud, everything else rearranges around it. Battery minutes stop being romance and become a commodity priced against that cycle. Evasion becomes a bid to outlast a schedule. Even courage changes shape, not the flair of a duel, but the patience to hold the boat steady while a process eats away the margins. The emblem is not a hero's name. It is a run on a chart, 6 submarines in 12 days by a single escort working as a node in a system. You can hate the fact. You cannot argue with the cadence. He remembers the oath that once defined prudence do not surface inside their ring, and sees it now as a clause inside a larger contract he did not write. The contract's terms are simple. Whatever can be replaced quickly will dominate what must be preserved. He can still feel the old pride flicker when a perfect evasion slides under a layer like a whispered forgery. He lets it flicker and lets it die. The new discipline is colder. Know the cycle. Bleed it when you can. Never mistake a pause for mercy. When his men look to him for a word, he gives them a measurement instead. Our survival is the minutes we can buy against their next pass. It sounds dry in the mouth and true in the bones. It closes the circle he has walked since the first fan slapped the black water. The sea has not been desecrated. It has been scheduled. He can dislike the schedule. He accepts it. Perfection can win a duel. Availability wins a war. And by mid-44 availability was pinging and closing.